Good morning and welcome to church this morning. We're so happy that you're here with us. Today we are looking at John 11 and it's all about where our faith is. So I'm just going to pray and then we're going to start. Dear Lord Jesus, I thank you for this day. I thank you that in the midst of everything that's going on in our lives, you respond to us in the ways that we need. So today, as we listen to this message, would you please speak to each one of our hearts, Lord, and let us know what you need us to know. In your name, Jesus, amen. So I'm so happy to be here with you today. My name is Eileen, and I'm just going to get right into it. We are looking at John 11, and I'm going to read beginning at verse 1. It's a very familiar story to most people, I think. So let me just read. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days, and then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." It is interesting to note here that it says that Jesus loved them, and so when he learned that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. We'll look at that a little bit later. "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." So Jesus is saying here that he has no need to fear, for he has faith in his Father and the mission that he had. Now, after he said this, he went on to tell them, the scripture continues, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, Lazarus' death that is, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So they don't understand the gravity of the situation. So Jesus then makes it very clear to them. It goes on in verse 14. "So then he told them plainly, 'Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him.' Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, 'Let us also go, that we may die with him.'" It seems like Thomas believes, or he's wanting to believe in who Jesus is, but the circumstances seem overwhelming to him. It's like a do or die attitude. You know, if it's going to be, it's going to be. Let's go to it. We do need to credit him with the fortitude to follow Jesus, even though it was dangerous. But it's very interesting to note that it was, in a sense, I'm just doing this because it's expected of me. But the disciples had seen so many miracles and witnessed Jesus raising people from the dead. In Luke 7, we see both the centurion's servant being healed from a sickness that was sure to end in death, it says, and the widow's son in Nain being raised up off the bier that the townspeople were carrying him out on. The centurion understood authority as he told Jesus not to trouble himself by coming to his house, but to just say the word and my servant will be healed. And Jesus was amazed and said to the crowd following him, "I have not found such great faith even in Israel." In the scenario with the widow of Nain, Jesus was moved by compassion and raised her son back to life. There is no asking for a miracle here. And Nain's located about 8 miles southeast of Nazareth. It's a small Arab village in Lower Galilee, which is interesting as well. We're looking at a Roman centurion and an Arab woman, but Jesus approached her and told her not to cry. He turned to her son and said, young man, I say to you, get up. And he did get up right off the bier and back to his mother. So these are two Gentiles, one with faith that Jesus had the authority to heal, and one who probably did not even glance at Jesus because of the grief she was dealing with. So it's interesting that Jesus responds to both of them, and it was not maybe even contingent on their faith, but it's his compassion for them. But shortly after this, in Luke 9, we see Jesus and the disciples in a boat heading across the water. And Jesus fell asleep, and the storm arose. You may know this story too, but the scripture says that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Master, Master, we're going to drown. He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm. Where is your faith? He asked his disciples. And in fear and amazement, they asked one another, who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him. And that is in Luke 8. So we see that Jesus is giving in these scenarios, he gives each person what they need. The centurion's servant was highly valued, and the widow had no help or standing in her society without her son. Jesus' heart was moved to compassion for them both. But here with the disciples too, it's interesting. Jesus is asking, where is your faith? Because they had seen so many things. But he knows that each disciple needed to be able to comprehend who he was and who he is today. So seeing the winds calm, the waves stop rolling around, and everything be just settled down, it was something that shocked them, and it began to open their eyes a little bit more to who Jesus really is. So Jesus was constantly teaching his disciples, encouraging their faith to grow. And that's what he wants to do for all of us. He wants our faith to grow. So first of all, we look at this. Why did Jesus allow Lazarus to even get sick? We know from Luke 10 that Martha had opened up her home to Jesus, and as follows: when they were passing through Bethany, and in the beginning of the chapter about Lazarus' death, the messenger that came from the sisters had said only, "The one you love is sick." So there's a big bond here, and they are thinking, like, why would there be a problem perhaps? Jesus has healed so many. But secondly, why did Jesus wait before going? A healing is always a fantastic testimony. And in fact, why did Jesus not answer the sister's plea, or in essence a prayer, by healing Lazarus from a distance? He had done that before, as I said. It's like he was doing something very different than what they were expecting of him to do. So why is that happening? Thirdly, Jesus said that the sickness would not end in death, but that it was not the focus of what Jesus was saying. The focus was on God's glory. And he said, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. But even with all this assurance, Thomas says, well, let's go to our deaths as well. So we look at this and we wonder, well, where was their faith? They were fearful and faltering. They needed assurance from Jesus, and that's what he gave them. An assurance that it would not end in death, and that it was for God's glory. But have you ever felt like that as well? That you know in your mind that God can do it, but the circumstances are so big you wonder sometimes? And then we look at Martha, the next person we're focus in this scripture. It says, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in their loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." And we know from Luke 10 that Martha was the one who was active in her home, showing her care through the love of acts of service. Jesus never condemned this. He never told her that she should stop what she's doing because she wasn't doing it well. She was just saying in that Luke records Jesus' word. Jesus never condemned us, but in fact, Luke records Jesus' words about the cost of being a disciple and planning things out, considering what is needed. It says, "Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are unable to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, 'This person began to build and wasn't able to finish.'" What did Jesus do but to remind her to keep her focus on him and not be bogged down by things that were not important at the moment? We need planners. We need people to do things. We need people who have vision for things and plan things out. So Jesus was not saying that what she was saying was wrong, but he was reminding her about the immediate situation. Whereas Martha had the faith that she would see Lazarus again in the future resurrection, Jesus was saying, "Now I am the resurrection and the life." And the resurrection of the human body is doctrine in the Jewish faith, as the book of Daniel speaks of the multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth, awaking to either everlasting life or to shame and everlasting contempt. And Jesus also said in verse 25 of this thing that one of his "I am" statements, and the Jews knew what that meant. When Jesus was saying "I am," it's referring to Moses back in the Old Testament, when Moses said at the burning bush, "Who do I say sending me to Pharaoh?" And God replied, "Tell him that I am sending you." A living God over everything. So Jesus said that plainly, and it was a statement that was understood as Jesus proclaiming himself to be God. And part of who he is life. This is a great example of Jesus not coming to abolish the law or the prophets, as he said in Matthew 5:17, but to fulfill them. The promise of the resurrection is not just for the future, but for now. So Martha responds with the statement that she did believe. There is no hesitation. She, in fact, uses 3 different titles for Jesus: Lord, Messiah, or Christ, and the Son of God. And the words, I believe, are in the perfect tense, which indicates a fixed and settled faith. In other words, she is saying, "I have believed, and I will continue to believe." She had a different kind of questioning from the disciples, but there was no wavering with her. But it got to the point, of course, where it was just too much for her. There's so much going on. She's grieving the loss of her brother, knowing that Jesus had healed people before who were sick, wondering why he didn't come. But so do you ever get to the point where it becomes too much for you? Jesus gives reassurance. He's a reminder of who he is in the situation. That's what he did for Martha. And where was her faith? It was fixed on the facts. It was about what she had seen and what had been tried and true already, but not being able to see farther than that. And then after this, we're at verse 28. After she had said this to Jesus, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached a place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Notice that's exactly the same thing that Martha said. But when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then some Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could he not, who opened the eyes of the blind man, have kept this man from dying?" So again here, the idea that Jesus, why didn't you come earlier? Because you could have stopped this. Mary says the same thing as Martha, but Jesus responds differently to her. And each time we see Mary, she's at the feet of Jesus. In the account in Luke 10, when Jesus comes to her house the first time, she is sitting at his feet, listening to him speak. Here in this passage, she falls at his feet and pours out her sorrows. And in the next chapter, we see her worshiping Jesus, giving her all. It says 6 days before Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Jesus knows Mary's heart. He knows that in the midst of the agony, she has faith in him, but she is being engulfed in the sorrow. He understands her pain and is overcome with grief when he sees her in pain. Jesus is the life, but they do not understand fully who he is, and he also grieves for all of them because they do not see who he is. And in grief, he weeps with her. So Jesus gives Mary what she needs. She needs compassion and clarity. She needs to know in the midst of the pain who Jesus is. And where was her faith? Her faith was foundational. She had a very good foundation of belief, but it was finite. She didn't grasp, again, she could not grasp all that Jesus was or who he said he was. So now we look at Lazarus, which you think, well, he's dead. How does this work? But if we continue on, it says, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" He's reminding her of what she had just said she believed, that he is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So they took away the stone, and then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Now I know that Lazarus is dead, and it was no fault of his own. He had a sickness. But I'd like to look at a little bit of an analogy here, because we can all be at different points of faith at different times in our lives. Martha here was, in fact, the only one who declared her faith. The disciples seemed very unsure of what Jesus would do, and Mary was crushed by the grief she felt. None of them could see through or past the circumstances to hope in something. But Lazarus' death can be an analogy of faith that is dormant or dead. It's finished or floundering or it's failed. And I'm reminded of an illustration I heard years ago about a lady who said she had a vision, a dream of Jesus coming to her and saying, "Come out of your house. Come out into the world. I will be there with you. You can leave all of this behind. You can leave the pain." Because a house in a dream usually represents areas of your life that are in pain or parts of who you are. And in the dream, she could see outside and see it, but she was still hesitant. And Jesus said to her, "But even if you cannot come out of the house, I am here with you." So Jesus is meeting her where she needs to be. And I think, if I think about Lazarus, it's like, well, what did he need? He needed new life, didn't he? He needed to come back from something that's humanly impossible to come back from. He needed resurrection power, and that's what Jesus has. Where was his faith? He was floundering, finished, it was failed. But like Lazarus, does your faith need new life? Is there something that has wounded you, that has brought you down to the place where you cannot believe that Jesus can do anything for you? Are you at a place like Mary, though, where you're so crushed that you can't do anything? You can't seem to move forward. Or Martha, where you're trying to actually deal with the problem, but again, humanly, it's impossible to deal with. Or like Thomas, who's just like, well, c'est la vie, this is what it's going to be, and just march on, pull up your bootstraps and go, not really understanding who God is and what he can do in your life. But if you're like Lazarus and you've never had faith, or your faith has been trampled because of circumstances in life, it's hard. It's very hard. I've been there myself. But Jesus is calling us to come out of our graves. Get up out of your grave, he says, and come out. It's stated too in commentaries that if Jesus did not specifically say, "Lazarus, come out," everybody who was in their tombs would have come out, because it would have brought everybody back, because Jesus is powerful. Jesus is the Son of God. He has power over life and death because he himself rose from the dead to give us new life. So now, again, Jesus, when he was telling them before to the disciples, he said, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, that you may believe." And then again at the end here, Jesus looked up and prayed, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing there, that they may believe that you sent me." So this whole story and the way it played out is something that they weren't expecting. They wanted God to work a different way. They were trying their hardest to get him there. There was a plea, there was a prayer, there was a messenger coming to ask him to please come and heal Lazarus. Why the delay? In this instance, we know. We don't always know in our own lives, but in this instance, we know. He was showing them faith. He was strengthening their faith in different ways. Jesus comes to us because we are all different. He comes to us in different ways to show us who he is and how his power in our lives can strengthen our faith in him, but also can bring us life, full life. It says in John 10:10, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." So what does Jesus do for us? He gives us full life. So where is your faith? Jesus gives each person what they need that, and that means the means to be focused on Him. So if you are fearful and faltering, He will build you up and strengthen you in Him. If you're fixed on facts, He'll bring you a reminder of who He is in this situation. If you have a foundational faith that is not wavering, but it's finite, you're finding it hard, you're finding it so difficult to believe that something could happen, He will bring you compassion in your pain and clarity on who He is. But if it's finished, floundering, or failed, or never even started, Jesus gives new life. He will bring you life. All you need to do is to call out to Him. I'm reminded of an old hymn, and all of the verses say something different. I've just taken a couple of lines from each one. You may recognize it. It's, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. When darkness veils His lovely face, I rest on His unchanging grace. And when all around my soul gives way, He is then my hope and stay. On Christ, the solid rock, I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. So today, if you need your faith strengthened, call out to God. Call out to Him. Ask Him for help to strengthen your faith. If you want to give me a call this week at the office, feel free to do that. Or email me with prayer requests. I would love to pray with you. That would be wonderful. But we want God to break into our lives and bring us all new life. Let's just pray together. Dear Lord, I just thank You for this day. I thank You, Jesus, that You are the answer. You are the one who gives us all we need. So I ask that everyone who's listening, Lord, will be able to call out to You. And Lord, they will just, without a doubt, know and feel Your tangible presence with them. Their faith will grow. And Lord, You will bring about new life. You will give them everything they need to grow in You and have a life that is full. In Your wonderful name, amen. Well, I thank you today for joining us. I'm so glad that you are with us again. Please do call the office or send me an email. Let me know how you're doing and how we can pray for you. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now.